Good morning.
Darling.
Morning, everybody. I'm glad you all could be here early in the morning for what will be a wonderful presentation. I'm Brian Harms, partner here at Troutman. Been working with Georgia Appleseed for many years, 15 years or so. And essentially, you know, the justice conversation since the 6th year, I believe. Right. And so very exciting. I'm going to pass it off to Michael, but welcome. Please get coffee, please get food, please get whatever you need. We're here. If you need anything, let me know. Restrooms are going to be over there. I'm going to hand it off to Michael because I know we're.
All right, is this work? Oh, this works. Okay, good. All right, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming this morning. My name is Michael Waller. I'm the Executive Director of Georgia Appleseed Center for Law and Justice. I know almost everyone in here, and it's so great to see all of you. We may have some folks coming in late. We actually, this may be the Justice Conversations that's had the most interest. We've been on a waiting list for weeks, and the topic I think is extremely important. People know that housing is an issue everyone cares about. Kids we always care about. They're our best investment, of course. So we may have some folks coming in. But you being here is extremely important because the issue is so critical. And I want to start off just kind of a very brief reflection. So this morning, I got up earlier than usual to be here. And so I'm sneaking out of my house. I have 3 kids in Atlanta Public Schools, and I'm trying not to wake them. And we also have a puppy, it's a little mini Bernedoodle puppy. And so I'm desperate not to wake the puppy. Oh my gosh, it's worse than a newborn. And so I'm kind of sneaking out. But as I was walking out and going out the back door, not the front door, because it makes too much noise, and just realizing like there's this, I step out into the chill this morning, and I remember this is a cozy, safe home that I have that I can provide for my kids. And that's great. That's great for them. It's the most important thing they can have, but it's also a real privilege for me. And I reflect a little bit on how different that is for tens of thousands of families in Georgia. And particularly some of the families that we get to work with directly at Georgia Appleseed. So I want to share a very brief story with you. We do the coolest things at this organization. And one of the cool things we did a few weeks ago is we did a series of interviews with 25 families about their housing situation. And these are Clayton County families. So they're close to home here. And some of these families have come through Chief Magistrate Judge Wright Hill's courtroom, and she'll be here in just a moment. She's run behind. But I spoke to a woman, her name is Miss Elizabeth. She's 64 years old. She's a grandmother, very proud grandmother of 2 young boys, and they live in a hotel. She calls it a hotel. It's a motel, and it is not a very nice one. And she's lived there for about a year or so. All of their possessions are in 2 bags. There's a backpack where the important stuff goes, and then the less important clothing and that sort of thing goes into a roller bag. Because she doesn't know if they'll be in that hotel that night, and she has a storage unit that is a priority for her. Like whatever she does, she's got to pay for that storage unit. So every morning she gets up a lot earlier than I did this morning. She gets up at 5:30 in the morning, and that is to prepare those 2 boys for school, which is the most important thing to her. Getting those kids to school is the most important thing in her life. So she gets up, she cleans those boys up, she makes some breakfast for them in the microwave in the hallway because there's not a microwave in her room. She washes their faces, feeds them, and then she has congestive heart failure and bad knees, but she walks the boys to school. Okay, so that's 7:30. She then takes a sign that she has made and she sits on a rock on the side of the road, and she asks folks to give her enough money to pay for the hotel that night. And at 3:30, she gets up, she goes to the school and gathers the boys. She walks them back to the hotel, helps them with their homework, because again, school is the most important thing to her. Gets them ready for bed. The beds are so filthy that she won't let them take the cover off the bed. She puts bedding on the bed. They sleep on top of that every night. When they go to sleep, after she's fed them something that she warmed up in the microwave, she then washes their clothes by hand in the sink and hangs them up to dry to get them started for the next day. That is not an unusual occurrence in Georgia. And it's just something that we need to think about, like our future. That home that I can provide for my children, it is the foundation for their success, right? Those children are the bedrock for Georgia, for our future, for the state's well-being, and its economic success too. So we have to invest in them. And it's incredible privilege this morning to be with leaders who are thinking about this issue for us, right? As we try to sort of struggle with this issue and we think about it, these are the folks who are actually trying to put into practice things that will improve lives for the 41,000 Georgia school children who are homeless. Just let that sink in for a second. And homelessness has a profound effect on education, but even the kids who aren't homeless yet, just an eviction, and we file 280,000 plus evictions in Georgia every year. Each one of those involuntary moves sets children back 3 to 4 months in their education. Some of these families have to move 2 or 3 times a year. So just think about that for a second. Those kids are the odds are against those kids. Those 2 boys, that 7-year-old and that 11-year-old that Miss Elizabeth cares for, as hard as she's working, I mean, the odds are set against those kids. And by her description, the kids are remarkable boys. But the barriers that they're going to have to overcome are huge. And we all have to work together to help them overcome it. So Georgia Appleseed, we're a nonprofit law center. And we advanced child well-being in Georgia. That's what we do. We care about kids. Thank you all for whatever part you've played over the years in supporting our mission. Again, it's a thrill every year to do this, Justice Conversations. This is our 6th Justice Conversation. Every year, really important topics. This year is just really profound to me, and in part because of the speakers that we have. I want to introduce 2 folks to get us started. Commissioner Christopher Nunn, Department of Community Affairs, a long distinguished career in the private sector and in government. What he's doing, his job is to improve housing for Georgians. That's a big part of his job, and I'm not going to go into detail because he's going to tell you about that and give us some opening remarks. And then Dr. Amy Steigerwalt, she's the chair of the Political Science Department at Georgia State University. You might, if you've been to one of these before, you might recognize her as our moderator in the past. You might hear her voice, and because you've heard her a lot on the radio. And she's an important thinker about judicial decision-making and policy making in general. And she's also a Georgia Appleseed board member, which we're extremely proud of. She's going to introduce our extremely distinguished panel this morning. So what we're going to do is we're going to have some opportunity for questions. So I hope you have some questions. We're going to pass out note cards. Is that right, Liz? No, we're not. Just going to raise your hand. Okay, we're going to do a little different this year. All right, so we're going to raise your hand when we get to that part of the program, and hopefully there'll be a few minutes for conversation. Liz, also I just wanted, Brian, thank you. Brian, thank you. Troutman Pepper, thank you so much. They're big supporters of Georgia Appleseed, and pretty much always have been. So I think from the very beginning, almost 20 years ago. 2025, our 20th anniversary. Liz, I missed anything? No, okay, great. Commissioner Nunn, thank you again for coming, and
appreciate it.
What you have to say?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to be with you today. I also appreciate the brief introduction, because that was spot on. Most importantly, thanks for setting the tone. If you don't pray to whoever you pray to every night, and thank him for a warm place to, or her. That's right. Thank you, Kay. I'm really honored to be right before this distinguished panel of women. But if you don't thank God every night for a safe, warm place to live, I encourage you to do so. Senator Kirkpatrick, it's great to be with you always, and all of this distinguished panel. Justice Colvin served briefly alongside my father on the Superior Court bench before he retired and she ascended to appellate roles. In this audience with a lot of attorneys, I have to share a quick story. So my daughter, who was in elementary school when my dad retired, we give retired judges lofty titles, senior judge. My daughter introduced him to her friends as a substitute judge, which is exactly what he does. And he's actually at 80 years old. I think he's on the bench in Macon today. Thank you all for making this a priority. You have some great friends, Meg Blackwood and Catherine Spencer, who we have known each other for a long time, and Meg's, you in her role, Catherine in hers as well. So many good friends here. I was asked to speak today a little bit about DCA's mission and how that ties in, particularly with housing challenges that we experience today. A little bit about the vital connection between housing and well-being, particularly child well-being, which I suspect in this audience, I don't need to spend a lot of time talking about. And then also the importance of collaboration in tackling these systemic issues. So I'll try to briefly address all three. With respect to DCA's mission, our mission is simple: to help build strong, vibrant communities. Well, what does that really mean? In fact, communities exist because of people. And so I like to think, and I think that most of the 600 or so people who work in our agency, are focused on how do we improve the lives of 11 million Georgians. It doesn't matter, your political party or your background. We've got 11 million people in our state, and our role is to try to help make their lives better. Now, I'm going to speak a little bit about how we do that on the housing front. I will tell you that for years, we have tried to impress the point that housing is critical community infrastructure. And, very honestly, because of the fact that, typically housing is viewed as a private sector activity, that has not always been widely embraced. But I think over the last several years, certainly since COVID, more and more leaders have come to this realization that housing is vital community infrastructure. Now, importantly, DCA does not own any housing. And we've got nothing to rent. The state is not a landlord, nor do we develop or construct any housing. And I should also note, because probably one of the two things that I hear the most is, why are you making me pay rent? And why have you not found me a place to live? We're also not a matchmaker. Our role in addressing housing challenges is that of a financier. And some of this financing is available through federal or state appropriations, and you need to thank the legislature and your congressional delegation for that. Some of that we tap into in the capital markets. But for the sake of brevity today, I'm going to talk about how we use these limited resources. And let me start with homeownership, because I know homeownership is certainly an ideal. And the Georgia Dream program, which hopefully some of you may be familiar with, is a first-time homebuyer program that combines beneficial financing, homebuyer education, down payment assistance to assist families realize the dream of homeownership. This year we launched 2 new programs or offerings to expand the reach of this program, and particularly to veterans, which are an important cohort in our state. But every year, these programs reach about 1,500 families in our state. In fact, over the last 45 years, there are more than 51,000 families in the state of Georgia that have, realized the dream of homeownership because of bond financed, Georgia Dream offerings. And I think that is really important because, if we think about it, again, I don't know everyone's faith tradition, but imagine waking up for the first time. And we talk about this in our office all the time. At the end of every year, imagine waking up and celebrating Christmas, in a home that you own, that your family owns, that you feel secure in. So that's really one of the areas that I'm very proud of. Now, we also know that not every Georgian will own a home, right? About 1/3 of the people in our state rent for whatever reason. Could be they don't have the resources. It could be that they choose not to own a home. But one of the most consequential tools in our arsenal are housing tax credits. And the housing tax credit is it's a Reagan era policy that, in my opinion, is emblematic of the best public-private partnership that exists today, both in its public policy effectiveness, as well as the fact that Georgia has become a leader in utilization of housing tax credits. We get more bang for our buck with housing tax credits than most any other state. Over the past 5 years, we have financed, again, we don't own them, but we have financed the construction of nearly 40,000 housing units in the state of Georgia. And I'm going to repeat that. And I want to clarify, we have financed the construction or rehabilitation, right, of nearly 40,000 housing units in the state of Georgia. And our portfolio consists of properties in 143 of 159 counties. So this is not just an urban tool. This is not just a rural tool. It is a flexible resource that enables us to provide safe and affordable housing across the state. And importantly, these properties house seniors, they house veterans, they house essential workers, but they house families. You know, I was in Bleckley County which is in Middle Georgia, for those of you who don't know. You know Cochran. Well, I was in Bleckley County last week, or week before last, for a grand opening, and the school superintendent was talking about how important this is. Literally, as she is talking about how important safe and affordable housing is to the schools, the school bus pulls up like right behind the window to drop off kids in the afternoon. I was like, did you plan that? Like, that was awesome. Right? Let me tell you a story just to kind of relate that point and drive it home. And I thought about it when Michael was sharing earlier. You know, I think it was last spring, doesn't really matter. Mayor Dickens and I were presiding over the ribbon cutting of a new development in Southeast Atlanta. And y'all know Mayor Dickens. He's a great speaker. He's got lots of energy. He's a good friend. And everybody loves to hear from Mayor Dickens. I was brief, but we both agreed that the real star of the show was the resident who got up and spoke. And I'm going to share her story in abbreviated form. But essentially, here's a mom who no longer had a place to live because of a domestic violence situation. She had literally been run out of her apartment, in the dark of the night. She was raising her two middle school boys who were, big strapping kids who needed, all of the things that they didn't currently have. And they were living out of their car, right? They weren't even in the extended stay. They were living out of their car. Now, this was not the long-term, pervasive, unsheltered homelessness that sometimes we are focused on and grappling with. This was exactly what you mentioned, which is how many school kids don't have a place to live at night, right? And so, sometimes they may crash on their friend's sofa, but most of the time they were living out of the car. She was getting the kids to school every morning and going to work. She may have worked for some of you. I don't remember where she worked. I know it wasn't for us because I checked, right? She went to her job every day, and she spent every waking hour trying to find a place for she and her boys to live. And closed wait list after closed wait list after closed wait list of affordable housing, she kind of grew desperate. And she shared this story almost in tears, that when this new development that was opening up, the Haven at South Atlanta, when they called her, she thought it was a friend joking her. And I thought, golly, how awesome is that you're in such a state of despair, and yet you can still laugh that your friend is joking with you about a place to live. She didn't believe them. They had to call her back and say, no, we're not joking you. This is actually and now her boys are enrolled at Booth Middle School right next door. And I will promise you, I've not seen them since this grand opening. I've talked to the property manager. I will assure you that those boys are doing better in school today now that they have a pillow to lay their head on and a warm place to sleep at night. That's why we finance the construction of housing tax credit developments. So I've talked about home ownership. I've talked about housing tax credits. Tax credits really work well for those who are, I'm going to be really wonky for a second, kind of in the 50 to 80% of area median income, which for those of you who are housing policy folks, you get it. Like, once you get into the 30 to 50% range, you still need some tenant subsidy. Now I mentioned finite resources, right? So the state does administer some tenant subsidy programs. The housing choice voucher program, which is it's widely known as Section 8. There are 20 housing authorities across the state that administer these vouchers. And DCA administers it for those parts of the state that don't fall within one of those others. We get about $120 to $130 million a year for voucher subsidies. Those funds are highly oversubscribed. The truth is, I should point out that the state's economic development success is really important here, because the best and most sustainable way to provide housing is to help those households tap into a good paying job, right? And so I think it's really important to remember that that is a part of our housing strategy, but we do administer vouchers across the state. And as I said, those funds are highly oversubscribed. Probably one of the biggest challenges that we have faced since COVID is not as much how oversubscribed they are, as the fact is we don't have enough landlords that will accept the vouchers. And so that's a real challenge. I could talk for hours. I'm going to wrap up. Lastly, and I really have only hit the highlights of 80 programs that our agency administers, but DCA does provide limited financial assistance to independent service providers who deal directly with individuals experiencing homelessness. And those funds are used to provide short-term assistance, to provide housing stability vouchers, as well as a range of services to help these folks to get back on their feet. Most of that funding comes from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Last year, the legislature gave us an additional $1 million or so to address what is a growing concern in our state around homelessness. And we're working diligently with the various continuums of care. There are 9 across the state with service providers and the like. I've touched a little bit on why this is important and the intersection between stable housing and well-being. Let me just wrap up by talking a little bit about collaboration. Rest assured that none of these issues get solved without lots of people working together, lots of people pulling up. We work with other housing authorities, with landlords, with developers, and with other state agencies. Nothing we do is accomplished in a vacuum. My last point on homelessness touched on housing and supportive services, and we work very closely with my colleague Kevin Tanner and our colleagues at DBHTD. Monica's here today with you. They help to provide those essential supportive services that are necessary, especially to deal with those most challenging situations and folks in our state. So I want to encourage all of you. I think about this panel. You've got policymakers, you've got the judiciary, you've got academic research, and really you've got passion. I look at all of you and I think about how much hope there is. We were talking a little bit earlier and kind of reminiscing about our younger days, Michael. I have a lot of optimism today because of the people in this room. So thank you all for the time. I realize I probably used a little bit more than I was allotted. Hopefully y'all will forgive me. It's great to be with you. Thanks.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning, morning.
It is really a delight to be here and to sit with this terribly accomplished panel. And my job is to make sure that they get the chance to be able to share with you. I'm going to incredibly briefly introduce all of them but you can read much more fully about them on here. But starting to my immediate left, we have Judge Caren Cloud, who in 2024 joined the Fulton County Juvenile Court bench. Previous to that, she actually was the legal and policy director at Georgia Appleseed. And so I think we still like to claim her as one of our own. Sitting next to her is Chief Judge Keisha Wright Hill, who was elected as the Chief Magistrate Judge in Clayton County in 2020. To her left is Justice Verda Colvin, who was appointed to the Georgia Supreme Court in July of 2021. And last but not least, we have the first ever legislator joining our panel, and that is Senator and Dr. Kay Kirkpatrick, who represents the 32nd District and is currently the chairman of the Children and Families Committee. And so please join me in welcoming all of them. So to get us started, this question actually is sort of very specifically for Judge Cloud and Chief Magistrate Judge Wright Hill. Can both of you describe how it is that you see housing instability and poor housing conditions impacting the children and families that you see in your courtroom? Right? And sort of what specific effects do you sometimes observe about children's health, their education, their overall outcomes? And how do these issues, particularly about housing, perhaps affect other challenges that many of these families are facing?
Okay. Can you guys hear me okay? Thank you, Amy. So I think I see housing issues just kind of woven into almost every case that comes before the court, in my courtroom. Even whether the child is there for a delinquency charge, which are, would be criminal charges if they were adults, or there are allegations of abuse or neglect. Housing and concerns around housing are just kind of woven into really every aspect of the issue and how do we resolve the issue. I had a case just yesterday. We were trying to figure out, what is the main issue, around why this child can't go home. And housing was the main issue. When the child first came into the court on a delinquency charge, housing was not an issue. But in the couple of months since the child has been involved with the court, his mom lost her housing. So now he's in defects custody, and mom is saying, I can't have him come home because I don't have a home for him to come to. And so now we're faced with a child who's dually involved, who's involved on both sides, and there's no resolution. We were, basically told there's all the waiting lists are full. There's no available housing. There's no resource that's available to this family. And so we kind of had to leave court yesterday with our hands tied. And I said, well, we've got to come back in a couple of weeks and see where we are. So that is constant. That is, it is, a very sad kind of recurring theme of, I can't send children home because moms and grandmothers and whoever, they say, we don't have anywhere for them to go. And so that's really how it impacts me the most, is because children are away from their families who they love, simply because they don't have a place to rest their heads. So.
Good morning. In the magistrate court, we handle 9 different types of cases, civil and criminal. I think I spend the majority of my time on evictions. So of course, I see housing instability issues every day. Out of 159 counties in the state of Georgia, our Clayton County Magistrate Court is the 4th busiest, and that's based on volume. So we see quite a bit of evictions. I will say that because we see it impacting the children on a daily basis, we have collaborated with our Clayton County Public Schools and have brought them into the courts. They come in when we have our evictions every Monday to try to address and assist those families that are going through evictions. Sometimes they're able to pull their resources to assist. sometimes even if the inevitable is going to happen and they know that they're going to have to move within 7 days or however many days that the parties agree to, the school can work as far as with transportation to try to ensure that the child or children are able to still attend the same school that they're at. So at least they can maintain stability as far as the same school and being around their classmates while their families are trying to work out the housing situation.
Justice Colvin, before you were elevated to the appellate bench, you actually served on the Superior Court, as Chairman mentioned. Can you speak about what you observed in that role? And also, as you mentioned to me when we spoke earlier about sort of the ripple effects of housing on so many of the other issues that we see in courts and in society.
Yeah. So as a Superior Court judge, you hear domestic violence issues, you hear temporary restraining orders, which deal with parents sometimes losing their stable housing. And so I saw firsthand how that affected families. And being in the role that I was, it was nothing that I could do. The only thing I could do was refer them to agencies, which usually said what, Commissioner Nunn said, they don't have any housing, everything is full. And so you see firsthand how it affects the kids. Also, while I served on Superior Court, I was involved in this program called Consider the Consequences. And that's where a video of me went viral, where I was talking to kids. And a lot of these kids had unstable housing situations, whether it was where they were living or who they were living with. And those things are ripple effect in the school system. And so as a result of what I saw, I became someone, I'm still very invested in our community schools. So just last night I met with a new teacher and I'm her mentor, and I'm going to be collaborating with her in ways to kind of empower students, speak to them and let them know that all the possibilities they have. So it affects them in every aspect. And the biggest thing is that it affects our communities. I mean, it affects the prosperity of our communities, whether our kids are actually advancing as they should, and ultimately what they do for the future. And so I always told them, your future affects my future. And if you fail, I fail. And I am very sensitive to this issue. It is very hard to be in a role as a judicial officer when you're very passionate about these kind of issues that affect people. And it's also kind of a part of now what I do with access to justice. Landlord-tenant issues is something that we're addressing to ensure that people who don't have the financial means for counsel can truly access justice. And it's not just something we say, not just something in our verbiage that we've come accustomed to hearing, but something that we actually implement. And so it affects everything and everyone. And it doesn't just affect that family, it affects all of us because it takes more from us and we become less of who we can be because of what they go through.
Great, thank you. Senator Kirkpatrick, as chair of the Children and Families Committee, your committee has actually been terribly active in addressing issues about juvenile courts, foster children, homelessness. You've also been working on how to keep kids from entering the justice system. Could you tell all of us about some of the issues that you're currently engaged in, some of the work that you're doing, and also how it is that some of these issues, which may not seem directly about housing, do relate more broadly to housing and the well-being of children?
Sure. I feel a little bit like a fish out of water as a doctor among all these lawyers and judges, but you'll give me grace, hopefully. So one thing that we know is that solutions come from communities, and it's very difficult at the state level to navigate how the state can help with considering also how the local communities need to be involved. And that's something we run into on a lot of different issues that state versus local control. One of the things that you mentioned is something that I'm not sure how we are going to address, and that is keeping families at risk out of the system, out of the juvenile court system, out of the foster care system. And the state really cannot fix that. We've made some efforts at that, but not all these kids that end up in the foster care system are abused or neglected. A lot of times there's situational things that come up. Somebody gets sick, a divorce, the house of cards just comes unglued. And so those are things that are prevention, and the state doesn't do prevention well. I can tell you that right now in the legislative arena. But we have been able to do some things, and we've worked a lot with the juvenile court judges, the Council of Juvenile Court Judges. And it was funny when we were meeting with them about this bill that I call the shot clock bill, which is Senate Bill 401, where we're creating a statewide data reporting system. The juvenile court judges met with us and gave us what they thought were the important data points and appropriate timeline and things like that to move kids to permanency in a most expeditious way. And one of the senior judges, he's probably my age actually, said, it's funny, we've been doing this work for 30 years and nobody's ever asked us our opinion before. So I found that to be unbelievable to some degree, but it goes back to what Commissioner Nunn said about collaboration. And you've got to have all the stakeholders in the room to get to solutions that actually work. You can pass laws, but the implementation many times is where things fall apart. So we did pass, and I was happy to carry this House Bill 1410, which was the community-based grant program for homelessness that Commissioner Nunn was referring to, Chairman Chuck Estration. It was his bill, and it acknowledges that the solutions have to start at the community level, because we know that rural Georgia is a lot different than the urban areas, and so we have to account for that. So that is funded and being implemented now. The other thing that we worked on is House Bill 404, which was the Safe at Home bill, which sets minimum safety standards for rental housing, because we know we've got a big problem with absentee landlords and people not doing the right thing with housing. So there are some things we can address statewide, but many times it comes down to local issues and how the local elected officials handle housing issues from the standpoint of density, from the standpoint of zoning, from the standpoint of NIMBY. But what we're working on the Children and Families Committee is we're trying to focus on things that impact particularly kids in state custody, because those kids are really in our custody as the legislature, because the decisions we make impact every one of them. And so we're trying to, one, keep kids out of the system, and two, work with the Department of Human Services to improve, to lower barriers for those kids so that we can get them back, either reunify with their family or to a permanent solution, which housing is a big part of. So who knows what we'll see this coming year. As you know, anybody can do a bill anytime, and I may be working on the exact same thing, but our lawyers are not going to tell me because of attorney-client privilege. And so these things become clear as we work through the committee process. But I'm honored to be chair of that committee. Obviously, I have children, and I know people care deeply about their children more than pretty much anything else. So I'm easy to reach. If you guys have a great idea, please let us know, and we'll take a look at it.
Well, then I will take my sort of ability as moderator to then ask maybe our panelists to provide some of that information to give as we're here. So, Judge Cloud,
Yes.
What do you see as the biggest challenge in addressing child welfare, and especially issues surrounding safe and stable housing as you're working in your courtroom? When we had spoke earlier, sort of before to get ready for the panel, you mentioned a particular family and their situation that epitomized your concerns, and I'd love if you could share with the audience and with Senator Kirkpatrick.
Well, and it's really similar to what Senator Kirkpatrick just talked about, was this idea of collaboration. And sometimes I think the lack of collaboration is often the most frustrating aspect of the work that we're doing in juvenile court. The family that you're speaking of, it's a family, it's the 5 children. 3 were living with the grandmother, 2 were kind of living between 2 or 3 different aunts. And within a month, all 5 children came into care. The grandmother actually signed the children into defects custody. She didn't want to give the children away. She did not. She had had the children their entire lives, and but she came to court because of the other two children. And she came in and she said, I have to give these children to DFACS because we've been living on our neighbor's porch. And, you know, I can't, this is not fair to the kids. I've got to find housing. I want to have all 5 of the kids with me, but somebody needs to help me find housing. DFACS had already been kind of working with the family, trying to support them and find housing for a couple of months, but there hadn't been any movement. And so now all 5 children are in care. There's been no progression towards finding the family housing. The children are all over the place in different areas of the state because it's very challenging. The children range from age 17 to 1. A lot of infighting within the family, so they can't figure out who can take care of whom, and so the kids are just in foster care. But housing is the main issue. The grandmother would have all 5 children. She wants them, but she doesn't have housing. And every time we come back to court, there's no one person who comes in and says, we figured it out. We've sat down, we've talked to all these different people and we're ready. We've got I have had 9 updates on this case. And every time it says the same thing. Kids are here, kids are here, kids are here. We don't have any solutions. So it is this lack of kind of the communities coming together in all of these different agencies and entities coming together to say, we've got to figure something out. We have 5 children who are spread out all over the place. It's our job to figure out the housing situation so we can get them to permanency. And it just doesn't happen. So there's a lack of, I think, this kind of community effort to resolve these issues. And as a result, children just continue to languish in foster care completely unnecessarily. There's no abuse, there's no neglect, just a simple lack of a place to live. So.
Chief Judge Wright Hill, when we spoke, you used a phrase that I really loved. You said that there's these issues that you see in your courtroom that simply cannot be solved with a gavel. I just thought that was such a great way to put it. But you've actually done, right, you've sort of used, right, your position or context to be able to address some of these issues. You helped propose and actually saw successfully enacted legislation that helps fund eviction programs. Can you talk about some of those efforts that you've done, sort of how you've worked with various legislators and other proposals that you've put forth to try to address some of these issues that you're aware of the fact that you can't solve with your gavel?
Absolutely. So as you said earlier, I started January 1, 2021. So as far as the big 5, my big 5 chiefs, Clayton, Fulton, Cobb, DeKalb, and Gwinnett, I'm the baby of the chiefs. There is pros and cons to that. The con is you don't really know what you're doing and trying to figure it out. But the pro is you have new blood and a clean slate. So I kind of when I started during the pandemic. So that's all that I really knew. And I'm solutions driven. So I see an issue and I try to figure out how can we resolve it. Initially, as we were trying to address the eviction backlog, I went to my board of commissioners and said, let's start this eviction mediation program. Now, luckily, they bought into what I said and they gave us $433,000 over 2 years. And those monies were to go to pay for the mediators so that we can address mediation to try to resolve these cases prior to going to court, because that'll get rid of a number of cases so we can get to other cases that have to be heard and reduce the backlog. The monies were only for 2 years. So while I'm running the program, I'm always thinking about sustainability. How am I going to sustain this? Well, what I did is I looked at other different bills and I went to my Clayton County delegation and we came up with a bill. It's House Bill 1313, which passed, it's funny, on April 1st, because I was like, is this a joke? The governor signed it on April 1st. But in essence, every eviction that is filed, $5 goes towards our eviction mediation program. And those monies goes towards running the program, in essence, paying for our mediators. How does that help our citizens? It helps because those cases that are solved in mediation, oftentimes it can be beneficial for the tenants. I can only give 7 days for you to stay in the house. But if they can work out an agreement in mediation with the landlord to stay 10 days or 15 days or whatever, they may not have to go to the street. It can go from one home to another. So mediation has been very beneficial in that sense. And our settlement rate's been about 70%. So, and again, it takes away those cases where oftentimes I find that communication just broke down, especially during the pandemic, because there was so much time and nothing was going on. The tenant could have been calling saying, I have the money, but the landlord is not answering the phone. And so just to put the two parties before a neutral party to try to come up with a resolution, we saw how mediation worked. And so I got bit by that bug and said, wow, my bill passed. Let's try again. So luckily our delegation, they're very open. In September, they provide an arena or a space where different departments and courts can come and say, what is it that you see? They look at it as though we're your eye, we're their eyes. We see things on a day-to-day basis they may not see at the Capitol. So we're to present it to them and then figure out, what legislation will help. So this past September, I said, well, that worked. Let me try some more. So I presented them 3 different issues, and fingers crossed they'll go through. One, I started last year. I also presented this one. It didn't get all the way through. It got a little ways and stopped. So that's an eviction record sealing legislation with different conditions to where a sealing would be appropriate. One of them where the plaintiff doesn't prevail. So they filed against you and you won your case.
Right.
Okay, but it's still an eviction
On your record.
on your record. Or the numerous cases where it could not even be intentional. They filed against the wrong person. They filed against 317A instead of 317B. And then they come and dismiss. Thanks for the dismissal, but it's still on your record. So those different things. But we've added other provisions, one of them being where there's a settlement agreement and the landlord received local or federal funding, such as during our national pandemic. Because when we did our distribution of rental assistance, I made them do a settlement agreement and an affidavit and all that, and then we dismissed the case. Through that program, luckily, we dispersed like $8.9 million in rental assistance, and that went directly into the landlords of Clayton County, which is good. But we were able to dismiss over 1,200 evictions, and that helped keep 2,300 people from being displaced, including children. And so that would be a condition. And then the third one would be during a public health emergency, like maybe a national pandemic. Different situations, but so we have different conditions, and hopefully we can get passed to the Senate and the House. Not starting from the beginning this time. So that's the first one. The second one, something again that I see when I see something, I say something. So something that I kept seeing, I'm pushing for rate caps on extended stays, hotels and motels. And what I did when I presented to our delegation, I went and we looked at 10 different extended stay motels, hotels. We got pictures, what they provide. And there are people paying over $400 a week for a room. So over $1,600 a month for a room. And it just seems very predatory. We're going to continue to raise these prices because we can. Mm-hmm. And then you are preying on vulnerable populations that they're not able to necessarily utilize traditional rental homes or what have you, due to it could be poor rental history or criminal history or the lack of affordable housing. And now this week is $400 and next week is $450. Why? Just because you can. And so that's something that that we're asking them to look at. And then the third piece of legislation we're looking at, my presiding judge, she found a bill out of, I think it's Ohio, and it kind of it deals with rent deposits during pending repairs. And so because while we recognize and acknowledge that there are some good landlords out there, okay, we're not saying all landlords are not good. There are also other landlords that do not do right by their tenants. And so in this Ohio legislation, what they do as if there is a repair that's necessary that needs to be made, and we're talking about plumbing, AC, water, electrical. In essence, the tenant sends the notice to the landlord, giving them, 14 days to repair. If they don't make that repair, then the tenant can go to that clerk's office, file a motion to remit the funds into the registry of the court. So the tenant is paying their rent. They're just paying it to the court. Now, the judge can review that motion, and if they grant that motion, that's what the tenant does. And during this time, the tenant cannot be evicted for non-payment of rent because they are paying. They're just paying into the court. And then if the landlord makes those repairs, then the landlord can petition the court to release those funds. Now, the landlord has to use licensed contractors for the electrical and plumbing to make sure that it is above board. And they also provide, if the landlord fails to repair after 2 months, that the tenant can terminate the lease and request the rents be released back to them based on fair market value. So that way, and also it serves as an incentive for the landlord as well. You can get your money, you just need to make the repairs. But we wanted to keep it that way because if the tenant moves out, the landlord could easily just bring in an unknowing tenant. But if you have a $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 sitting over here, maybe that'll encourage you to make the necessary repairs. So that's what we're pushing for the legislature to see this session. Hopefully we have the same results.
Serving as a matchmaker. I love it. Justice Colvin, I guess, again, maybe speaking to your time on the Superior Court bench, were there similar issues that you saw or challenges that particularly sort of to steal Chief Judge Wright Hill's phrase that couldn't simply be solved with a gavel, that sort of needed solutions elsewhere, that your hands were tied as a judge?
I think because the magistrate judge primarily deals with those issues, what I have spoken about has probably covered all of that I could say about that, but I would like to piggyback on something she mentioned, extended stay hotels. So the Supreme Court in 2023 dealt with this issue. It was the cases Efficiency Lodge Incorporated versus Nissan et al. There were 3 residents, if you will, who lived in extended stay housing. And just like when you register to stay at a hotel, you sign the form, the agreement form. Well, these forms have been completed, but not really. So they didn't have an ending date of stay. They had some other provisions within it or without it that didn't make the agreement complete. And even where the agreement was complete, we found as a court that you couldn't just say, well, we don't think this is an innkeeper-guest relationship, so therefore it's a landlord-tenant. We actually spelled out in this opinion what courts have to do. And what we've said is that, of course, you start with the agreement, but even if the agreement is complete, which in these cases, most of them weren't, you still have to, parole evidence is admissible. You can look beyond the agreement to see, what is this really? So not only are you looking at the possession that the person has the room, but you're looking at, have they made this their home? Did they bring in furnishings? Did they use this address as the place where their children live to get them registered for school? And all of those kinds of components are necessary for determining the relationship. Because what the Efficiency Lodge tried to say, well, this is innkeeper guest. They were here for just a period of time. And what the resident said was, no, that's not true. One of them had a complete agreement, but he said that agreement was extended. Like, I've been here forever. I've been staying here forever. And they even tried to map it out where it was like, well, you can stay for 90 days and then you have to leave for 2 days and come back. And so what our court said is that, the trial court, while the trial court and the Court of Appeals addressed the issue, ultimately finding that it was a landlord-tenant relationship, therefore they had to go through the dispossessory proceedings versus the lockout proceeding for innkeeper guests. That's what the hotels want to do. That way they can just lock the door, you can't come in. And so the trial court and the Court of Appeals said, okay, this is landlord tenant. But what we did, we clarified what the courts have to do. They can't just say, well, it's not innkeeper guest, so it's landlord tenant. We actually says the court has to go through an analysis. And I think the reason why this, as I looked at this, I thought, okay, even if they're right, why do we need to do this opinion? The reason why I think this opinion is so vital, because it puts everyone on notice, including extended stay hotels, that no, you can't, this is not a game of chicken. If it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, works like a duck, it is a duck. And so that's why we said, look at the holistic view of what this is. When this person is saying, no, you can't just lock me out of my room. This is my home. And so a home encompasses more than just possession. It's about the other aspects of what a person does to say, this is my resident, this is where I'm living. And so when you were talking about them going up on rent, now see, I didn't even know that. And my question was, is this kind of looking at what courts are doing and say, okay, well, since you're gonna say this is their home, let me just charge more. So I think, I can't speak on legislative matters, but I think what the things that you're thinking about, I think makes sense, a lot of sense. But so we can't do policy as a court, but we can clarify what the law is, explain to the lower courts what is important for determining landlord tenant. And I think this puts everyone, including those extended stay hotels, on notice.
Can I just piggyback on that? And I think it's important, and I think we may talk about this later, when we talk about collaboration and educating and informing, making sure we're on the same page, because I have had issues with law enforcement, and I love our officers, but sometimes they're not always doing the correct thing. And I had a situation, I will never forget this. I was at a luncheon, it was a Friday, and I got a call that they were trying to put out this woman out of this hotel. She had been there for 7 years and it was under new management. And they didn't want her there. And they said, you have 15 minutes till you got to go.
The lockout provision.
Right. And then they called the police, because we think the police are gonna, and the police said, well, it's private property, there's nothing we can do. And I said, no, you have to go through the process. So an eviction has to be filed. And so they changed it. But luckily, they know now in my county, they're going to call it. The officers, I think I've made it clear, you have to do the right thing. And if you're going to get to that result, you have to do it the right way. And so I speak to, we have meetings all the times and lunches and brunches and talk about these type of things. And they just called me the other day, because now it's, if establishing a residency is 30 days, let's just say. So we'll put you in room 10 for 28 days, 29 days. Oh, we gotta do renovations over here. We're gonna move you over here to room 12. Now, your residency has ended and stopped, right. So now I can put you out.
And I think they should look at this opinion, because I think this opinion would suggest that won't cut it.
Can I just add one thing to that? And you're gonna have to repeat the name of the opinion for any non-lawyers like me.
I'll send you a copy.
Okay, what I was gonna tell you is that this extended stay hotel issue is across the country. This is not just Georgia. And so I have just worked with our National Conference of State Legislatures, who researches things on our behalf about what other states are doing, to do a 50-state survey of how other states are handling extended stay issues. And I'd be happy to share that if that would be helpful.
Thank you.
Well, actually, so Senator Kirkpatrick, we have a room of interested people. We obviously have a set of judges who have been thinking about these issues a lot. Are there ways that we can help all of you in the legislature do your job, right? I mean, you sort of mentioned one of those judges saying we hadn't been asked. Are there ways that groups like Georgia Appleseed, that interested citizens can help facilitate getting the necessary information to you? And what's the best way to even do that?
Well, there's two things. First of all, the thing that Judge Cloud said about communities and collaboration is really important, because a lot of these issues are local, can be addressed locally, or solutions can be brought forward locally. And so getting engaged at the community level for everybody in this room, I'm certainly engaged in my community on what specific problems your county or your region has or your town. I think that's really important. So that's something everybody can do. The other thing is, I bet everybody in here is registered to vote and is participating in our rights as citizens by voting, but we've got to take it another step. So you've got to know who your legislators are, because developing a personal relationship with your legislators is not that difficult at the state level, and it's super important. So when I get a call or an email from Darlene Lynch, she has worked to build a relationship with me, even though she's not my constituent, but it's very important to figure out who your people are that represent you, and to be sure that when you contact them, they know who you are. And you can do that several different ways. You can either send them an email introducing yourself. You can call them. You can try to set up a meeting, not necessarily during session. It gets kind of crazy. But in the off session, they're always interested in hearing from their constituents. And most of them will meet you either at their office or for a cup of coffee in the district or whatever, just so they put a name with a face or an email address or whatever, because that matters in the heat of the moment when the bills are flying back and forth, that you can be a resource for the legislators. Because the way we operate down there, which is, it has good and bad points. We're a citizen legislature. So we're full-time, flat out for 3 months. And then people kind of go back to their day jobs for 9 months, which is problematic to some degree, because it limits the amount of time you can spend working on policy. I retired from my day job, so I work on policy every day. But that's a blessing for me to be able to do that. But we all have expertise in different things. So I know a lot about healthcare. I don't know a whole lot about banking, farming. I've learned a lot about the court system, but I still am not an expert in that. But we all have different points of view and different things that we bring to the table. So one of the things you can do as you're introducing yourself to your legislators is say, look, this is what I do. This is my area of expertise. And I'd be happy if you need to bounce something off of me, or if I can provide any information about fill in the blank issue. They may take you up on that, because we're not like Congress. One, we get things done. Two, we balance our budget, but don't get me started on that. But we also don't have a lot of staff. And so in Congress, the country, you may already know that the country is run by 25-year-olds who are up there being staffers or interns. But at the state level, my administrative assistant is sitting over there, Hannah Holcomb. She's going to be a lawyer. Oh my God, another lawyer. But anyway, I share Hannah with another senator, and we're both committee chairs. So each of us will also get an intern, and that's it. In the House, they share 6 House representatives share an administrative assistant. And so we don't have staff all over the place. So it's pretty easy to get through that wall and reach the actual legislator one way or another. So if anybody wants more information about how to do that, you can give me a call.
Excellent, thank you. And I will say, yes, the interns, I used to be the director of that statewide program. And so they are college students who start on day one and start to do policy work because there's nobody else to do it, which is both great and perhaps a little concerning.
But
we do vet them a lot.
But I will say that we do have a robust research department in the Senate that is staffed by lawyers, and they can look up what the code is, how it came to be that way, and things like that that you wouldn't know if your constituent contacts you about any random issue, which happens every single day. And I utilize their services quite often. They probably dread seeing an email from me, but so we do have some resources, and we have, as I mentioned, this national organization and also a regional Southern Legislative Conference, and they all have research capabilities. And so if you're willing to put the time in, it's not that difficult to get to the bottom of an issue that you're trying to research.
So this is really sort of for all of you. Each of you at different times has mentioned collaboration. And so I'm curious if each of you could talk about sort of what collaboration looks like in your particular sphere, right? And what it looks like right now. And also perhaps what you wish it also could be.
How about I'll start with that one. So one of the things that has always driven me crazy in state government ever since I got down there is the siloing of the agencies and the way that communication goes along sort of chain of command and doesn't really go across agency lines, and even more so get outside of agencies. So we've got, the agencies are executive branch, we're legislative branch, and the judicial branch sends us strong messages about what we did wrong quite often. But in our specific case, the Children and Families Committee, getting the court system, the judges, the advocates, the DHS or any other agency that overlaps with child welfare, stuff like DBHDD, for example, the Department of Community Health, because they pay for a lot of the services, is really critically important, but that is not a natural way that the legislature works. And so it really takes a conscious effort to get those people in the room. We've created some things that have helped with that, like the Behavioral Health Coordinating Council. We've got representatives from every agency that is impacted by that, and we meet quarterly. And so there's some benefit to getting people in the room who have different perspectives. So that can happen at the local level too, but I think at the state level, it's critically important because it's taxpayer dollars, and we want to get the most bang for our buck for the things we're committing to. And so I fully support trying to break those walls down, and I think we're in better shape in that area than we were when I got down here in 2017. And a lot of that's just leadership at the tops of the agencies.
I'll speak locally. Collaboration is everything. 10 to 15 years ago, my beloved city, even though I'm born and raised in Atlanta, my beloved city of Macon, we began transforming. And now our city is kind of like the bustling place that middle Georgia. Our downtown is transformed. We were just like many cities, historically redlined, but we have come together across racial boundaries, economic boundaries, but it's all been because of collaboration. So for instance, our Chamber of Commerce worked with the school system to get community leaders like myself involved doing what I said earlier. I'm now a mentor to a teacher. I'll be with the class. As a judiciary member of our judiciary, I began investing in schools. I adopted a school, helped with the PTA there. And so all of us are kind of working together for the betterment of our entire community. And it's even our organizations, our Rotary clubs, our Kiwanis clubs, everyone is working together to build the community. When you do that, you can effectively change the lives of your residents with higher paying jobs. You can change the trajectory of students because all the community is invested in them being empowered. So we're doing internships to get students involved. We do that with our colleges. All of us try to get interns in, even if we can't pay them, to help galvanize their interest. And it has just really transformed our city. When I was on the bench in Macon before I went to the appellate bench, I remember one day I was working late, it was night, and I looked outside the window and I just started crying because I thought about when I moved to Macon in 1999, it was like a ghost town. The sidewalks literally rolled up at 5:30 and it was nothing. And that night when I was looking out, our theater was going on, cars were everywhere. Now you can't find a place to park downtown. I'm like, growth. But we can't make enough loss. But none of that happened until we started recognizing that unless all of us work together and we don't care about who gets the credit, then all of us can advance. And if we can do that, if we can do that statewide, but if we can do that in every local community and bring that thought statewide, it can be transformative for Georgia. And I think it will pull us together and understand this is happening, make it, even though you've got, different political ideologies, But the one thing we recognize, the poor, the rich, the black and white, is that we couldn't grow unless we all were all in on this. And so it's a collective effort that we do. And every year we do a survey for the whole community. How are we doing? What do we need to continue to improve on? So we keep pushing ourselves to be better and do better. I think that's huge.
Absolutely. So collaboration is everything in Clayton County. And let me give a shout out to Georgia Appleseed because we have our Clayton County Homeless Intervention Project, HIP, and we meet quarterly with different nonprofits. I'm there and we learn what's going on. Again, what is the beat of the street? What's going on? What do we need to address? And I'll give you an example of how collaboration has been so helpful. There is a situation going on with an individual. Well, it's been on the news, so I guess I can say it. Okay. So this woman, Angela Hassan, ran a business or organization called Hassan Second Chance, where she was stating that she was assisting individuals with rental assistance, and for just a $500 pledge, which would go towards the attorney's fee to help seal their evictions, she could help with assistance or what have you. So ultimately, this what she presented did not come to be. Let's say that. Okay, and so she is currently enjoying turkey and dressing in our beloved jail. There are pending charges, so it's alleged. But at this point in count, I believe there's over 60 alleged victims, thousands of dollars, because it's not only the 500, there were also instances where people were giving their rent to her, because you know how landlords will not take partial rent. And so if there were back rents that were owed. And so nonetheless, individuals became evicted as a result of this, had writs signed. It's just been a debacle. We found out it's not just our county, but nonetheless, we came and let HIP know. And because we have different organizations, individual organizations helped how they could. So we realize and understand a lot of the rental assistance has dried up. But Housing Plus may have $2,500. Housing Authority of Clayton County, they can assist with 1 month's rent. Now, it doesn't matter what it is, just 1 month. And the different properties that we had built relationships with during the pandemic, where they knew that we said, we're gonna give you a check, don't put them out, and it came to pass, those relationships have been established. So now we're able to contact those properties to see, can you put these individuals who are put out due to no fault of their own in these situations? And due to the collaboration with the nonprofits, it's able to assist with security deposit, first month's rent, moving truck, storage unit, to try to prevent the situation from getting any worse than it has. And so, again, the collaboration with the nonprofits, Georgia Appleseed, all the different nonprofit organizations that work within the county to assist us has been quite beneficial.
And so I'm going to be calling Michael and Darlene because I think we need a HIP in Fulton. But you know, HIP really is the perfect example of Judge Wright Hill would not have been able to touch kind of all of these people who come to HIP meetings and say, we need to come together. I don't know what's going on. This is her way to always know what's going on in the community, where the resources are, who has more resources, who has fewer resources, and to actually say, I've got 3 families who can use these resources right now. That is something that we need. Because I'm kind of operating, I think we talked about this a little bit, I'm operating from a blind spot. I can only deal with the information that comes before me in court. And so if somebody doesn't tell me something, in court in the moment, I have to make decisions based on whatever is brought to me. But if I had, a HIP where I could say, well, wait, I know that these 4 organizations have funding, and I know that they, are able to support families, that is an invaluable resource. And so maybe based out of the juvenile court. So we'll be talking about that. But I also think, having, opportunities such as justice conversations and just that having, whether it's, talking, giving us the opportunity to talk to an audience and to share what we're seeing. And so, all of the attendees can take this out into their communities and say, did you know that these things are going on? Let's reach out to Judge Wright Hill or to Justice Colvin or to Judge Cloud to see how we can help, and there are resources that you may know about that you can bring to us. And so I think continuing to bring the community together in kind of these higher level conversations, and then for these, kind of very basic, what is happening right now in the moment conversations at the local level. I think that is the collaboration that communities need, big or small.
And so do we have any questions from our audience in a bit of we have a couple minutes left, wanted to give a chance.
It seems like one of the worst things in the world is these extended stay situations. I took a lady who was at our house for dinner about a year ago back to her place, and the very best thing about that place was there was a very lovely sign, but that was the end of it. On the other hand, what would we do without these extended stay? There's a lot of people that are in some maybe perverse way benefiting. So to your point, Amy, about collaboration, what is the power of collaboration to, and you're passing orders. So what is the way that collaboration can improve this situation? I mean, people have jumped into this, landlords, and had made a financial benefit of it, which they would only do if there was a financial benefit. But there seems to be lacking a balance. So how can collaboration, like we did in Macon, how does that help make a terrible situation into something less terrible, at least tolerable, because there is a value in having a roof over your head, however burdensome that may be in the moment?
About collaboration with talking to your representatives and legislature about having statutes or regulations that dictate how they run those businesses.
Yes.
Because they will still make a profit, just not, a grossly unjust profit. So I think that's what personally, I personally think that's what has to happen, because people, if there's not a rule, human nature is you'll do whatever you want to do. And I think that's where we are. That's just my personal opinion, but I'll leave it to our.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, some of that can be handled locally, but not all of it. And so that's why we were having the conversation about how this is being addressed across the country, because you're right. There are people, families living in these places who would not have a place to go if they didn't exist. And so nobody's trying to put a private business out of business. That's not, in my caucus, that's not what we do. But there's a balancing act between businesses' rights and the rights of the people who live there. And the work on that, if there's a theoretical bill that we're working on, gets done in committee, and the stories matter at committee presentations more than the facts or the data. Those of you who have been to the Capitol know this. And so it's a great opportunity if you're tracking bills to, and if there's a really egregious situation that you know about, for someone to present that when the bill comes up for a hearing in the committee. And the chairman of the committees have a lot of leeway in, one, what bills they hear and don't hear, and two, how much testimony they will take and how long people are allowed to speak. So I think there's a lot of interest in this topic, and I do think there will be something that will show up this year, but the committee process is probably where people here could make the biggest impact.
I would say, along with the laws and the policy, and when you talk about collaboration on the local level, like I said before, I think bringing law enforcement involved. I think it's about having good relationships. I can call my chief of police, I can call my sheriff and say, there looks like there's a lot of activity going on here on this street. Can y'all make your presence known? because that's a part of cleaning up and helping keep our children and our families safe too. Because
Right.
there's a lot going on in extended stays. You got drugs, you got prostitution, you got sex trafficking, all kind of things are going on. So make it uncomfortable for those that don't want to comply with the law, and make sure the law enforcement is not just passing them by, but is making their presence known. So if law enforcement is there, police officers are there, then the people that don't want to be around them will leave. So we're working with the pricing and the caps so that people can afford to make it as a temporary situation. And if they choose to move on, but at the same time, keeping them safe while they're there.
And we want to be careful about, locally, communities are doing something, but what happens if they do too much and don't kind of get into the state's role, then they just move to a different county, that
Right.
extended stay. And so that's why we have to do something that is globally, because, something bigger than just local, because that's what happens. They just move to the next door county that might not be as insistent. And so, yeah, exactly. Statewide collaboration would be best.
Yes.
No, please, go ahead.
My name is Catherine Mars. I work for Atlanta Legal Aid. We see a lot of housing conditions. And we advise families to call code enforcement. Sometimes a portion comes out, sometimes they don't. But egregious conditions, not not small problems, holes in roofs, rampant mold, installation, insects. What suggestions do you have for us as far as advising these families when there's a conditions issue? Because as you know, especially the judges know, they're even one day late, like they complain, they become a problem. They're one day late on their rent, that eviction is filed, they can be split by the landlord, and they have no defense if they don't have the money, if they, a little bit short. So what do we do in those cases?
I'm a board member of many things, but I'm also on the board of Homes Ministry, and it's an organization that when we have people like that, we as the entity, because I'm limited in what I can do, but we get involved in actually being the conduit to talk to that landlord. Now, you're right. Sometimes they'll do the eviction notices, but luckily we have a relationship with code enforcement, so they'll keep going back. So you can let that person go, but they're gonna stay on you until you get it right for the next person. And then we work with entities to find other places. So are there a lot of entities like that? I would think if we've got those in Macon, I know they've got to have them in Fulton, Metro Atlanta, those entities that are, and all of our funds go toward helping families like that. So like the family that we helped recently, they didn't even have a stove. The stove was out of order. Plumbing didn't work. I mean, it was just egregious. And so we stepped in as a ministry to try to get that done. So I would think they can't do everything, but we're a go-to.
Right. And I would just add that, with 404, with House Bill 404, what we saw last session, well, really the two sessions, was this beautiful collaboration of George Appleseed, ABLF, Atlanta Legal Aid, coming together to support this bill, to say, these are the things that we're seeing, these are the things that our community members are telling us that are needed in terms of housing conditions. So you start with House Bill 404, and then this session, next session, you just keep building on that, because we know as much as you can do at the local level with the state of housing conditions that we're seeing across the board. I mean, it has to come from, it has to be enacted in statute to say, as landlords, you have to do X, Y, and Z. And so I think continuing to just gently push us further, as much as we can, with the requirement to have certain housing conditions, even in extended stay, where you talk about, things are so dirty that you have to put a sheet down. Everybody should have the right to a certain quality of life, no matter where you are. And so that needs to come from, I think, from the state legislature to say, we have a standard of living for every single child, family in Georgia, and this is what it is, and everybody has to adhere to it. So,
Well, and the proposal that Chief Judge Wright Hill was talking about, where you would sort of file, right?
She's on
saying,
it.
yeah, like that. that
all
would
over it.
that one would directly address what you're talking about, right? It would prevent that process, and so.
A lot of times it's, we pass laws and then their rules and regulations sometimes take a while to be written, and the enforcement either takes place or doesn't take place. And so then we pass another law. So we got a bad habit of doing that. That's not really the problem all the time. It's sometimes getting the agency that's accountable to enforce the law or the rules and regs. And it also is a matter of trying to help people that get caught up in these situations, know how to navigate the system to be sure that their rights under the law are being upheld, because your person who's staying in an extended stay hotel or whatever doesn't always know what to do if they're being treated unfairly or whatever. And so I think at the local level, that's one of the things that we have to do, is work with all the groups. There are so many nonprofits in my area working on this extended stay issue, but a lot of times nonprofits work in silos too. And there are different reasons for that. One is communication, just resources, and one is competition for funds and a lot of other things. But anyway, so it's not just passing the law that we have to worry about. We have to worry about what happens after that. And because of what I said earlier about the citizen legislature, most of the people that are going back to being a insurance broker or a farmer or whatever they're doing, they're not spending their 9 months off trying to be sure that their bill that they passed was implemented correctly. I have the luxury of working on that because I'm retired. But anyway, so there's more to it than just passing laws.
All right, well, thank you very much. I'm gonna close out here and just bear with me for a couple minutes. I do wanna say a little something about each person here and then provide a little information, a little extra context, share a brief story with you. Senator Kirkpatrick, thank you so much for being a part of this. This is an exciting experiment for us to have a lawmaker and a policy in the panel, and it's been a raging success. I think we can all agree with that. Thank you for your work and your passion. It is so important to have medical professionals who understand what healthcare means, what healthcare means to children, and then the relationship between healthcare and those social determinants like housing. So thank you so much. Justice Colvin, your passion is infectious. It's always a pleasure being around you. You're the sunniest Supreme Court Justice. Judge Wright Hill, I mean, it's been a tremendous pleasure watching you over the last few years as your passion for housing and the way you've tackled this problem, and been fairly fearless too, because it's a tough, complex issue. Things like second chance come up and they can set you back, but your optimism has continued to push you forward, and you're just taking on more and more, and it's a privilege to work with you. Caren, I miss being attached to the hip with you, and so I'm excited about working with you in this role. Just a quick framing, so we think about the role of government. There is the role of sort of setting the rules, like sort of writing the laws, and then there's the role of enforcement. And we mentioned that a little bit today, code enforcement. That's an important role of government as well. There's the role of finance and sort of supporting the development in the private sector of resources that are needed and directing that. But there's also the convening power of officials of the state. We have examples of that here. And that's something you can ask your representatives to do. That is something that politicians, judges, and other public officials can do, and it's extraordinarily powerful. So there is something called the Pathways Committee that the juvenile court convenes in Fulton County to bring constituents together around juvenile justice and school discipline issues. There's HIP, which has been very successful over the last 6 years or so because the chief magistrate judge convenes that. And when she tells you to come, you show up, right? The Supreme Court has the Justice for Children Committee. People show when the Supreme Court asks you to show up, right? And the legislature has all kinds of powers to get people to show up. So that's an extraordinary power. You ask what you can do. You can simply tell your local legislator, I want to hear about this. I want to have a conversation about this, because that's where the new ideas are going to come. That's what's going to create energy and progress moving forward. So thank you all so much for being a part of this today. We'll leave you with another quick story. So Miss Sims, I talked with her a couple weeks ago. She has children, small children, and she's lived in a hotel. In fact, her children have grown up in a hotel. She's been there for 4.5 years or so. And the reason I'm gonna tell her story is not because it's, I'm gonna share some, details that will make you cry. We did that earlier. But I want to explain something about this hoteling situation and the trap. And I'm so glad it came up today. We often talk about hoteling in the context of foster care, and that's made the news a lot. But we have a hoteling problem in Georgia, and it's for thousands upon thousands of children who are not in foster care, who are not in the system, with parents desperate to keep them out of the system. 20% of kids in foster care are there because of inadequate housing. But they're trapped because these conditions are terrible. So you might ask yourself, why not just leave? Well, here's the trap. So something happens. You sort of do you're living in a home. There's a problem. You lose your job. There's an emergency, something like that. You can't afford. So you're desperate to stay out of your car, right? You don't want your car to be your home because generally it's sort of a home to hotel to car to the street. Like that's the path. So you find a place to stay. And of course it's temporary, but it's incredibly expensive. Just for that one room, it's $400 to $500 a week. Some people have to pay by the day, $60 to $70 a day. All right, you're going to make it the first week. Well, once you pay through that first month, you don't have any money. And to get into a home, and these are figures just Mrs. Sims' problem. As she tried to find a home over the last 4 years, she was going to have to come up with 2 months' rent to pay the landlord, right? In addition to that, she was going to have to prove that she had an income of 3 months' rent. She was going to have to also pay a security deposit. That's thousands upon thousands of dollars. In addition, every single time she applied for a place, she had to pay a $75 to $150 application fee, which she lost if she didn't get the apartment. And on top of that, she was going to have to pay a $200 to $300 administrative fee. So just to get out of the hotel, she had to come up with $7,000 in cash when she's paying $400, $500 a week, plus the other expenses that come from living in a motel. So that's the trap. You can't get out. You want to get out, but you can just imagine in your own financial situation, sort of scale that up and how difficult it would be and how you might feel trapped. I just wanted to share that with you to help you understand, how some of this occurs and why these families get stuck in this situation. I hope you all will consider us a resource. Georgia Appleseed is a great source of information about housing justice issues and school justice issues about kids. I hope all of y'all will keep in touch with us, continue to volunteer. Those of you who do, you want to get involved, please reach out to us. Go to our website, georgiaappleseed.org or gaappleseed.org. There's a lot of resources there in the school and housing justice. It's resources about how to advocate for people. So please check us out. If you have any questions about housing, I'm here. Lucy Ruiz is our policy counsel in charge of housing. So she runs our housing justice program. Liz is our development director. She is here. Darlene Lynch is our legal and policy director. She will talk to you all things policy and programming as well. And of course, I'm available too. So thank you all. Can we get a quick photo? I know that y'all are running. Can we get a real quick photo? I'm sorry, I know y'all probably have to run. Oh, and I forgot to mention, so there's a tape. No, this is tape. So if you want to put everybody. Actually, we met in an elevator.
Where do you want to Okay, all right. I'm trying to be free. I'm free. I know. So, all right. I'm going back to do my Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, Oh. I'm on.